So the sermon title is, What is it like? What is it like? And we use that in a lot of things. We'll do it when there's a food that we've not had before. We'll say, well, what is it like? And the person will try to describe it to you. But describing a flavor is kind of weird. Like, it doesn't work so well. But thinking about that, like when I lived in Germany, Jaeger Schnitzel, that was my favorite meal. Loved it. But some of you have not even heard of it. And a Jaeger Schnitzel is a thin breaded pork with a mushroom gravy. And it always was served with pommes frites, which we know those as French fries. That was my favorite meal. But when you try to describe it to somebody who's never had it before, I still don't know how to tell you what it tastes like. And unless you've had pork, but then, is it breaded and the gravy, all that, you just don't know. Sometimes you'll say things like, depending on where you work, they'll say, well, what is it like to work there? Now that's a little easier to describe. People have asked me, because I've worked at Home Depot for 30 years now, and people will say, what is it like to work at Home Depot? And it has changed over 30 years. It's not the same as when I started. I don't know if you've ever shopped there, and they'll have aisles gated off that you can't go in. It's so frustrating, like, man, I wanted that thing in there, and you can't go in the aisle. Or you'll see the guy carrying the flags and the forklifts behind him. I don't know if you guys have been in the store, but that's today. When I was hired, we didn't do that. We didn't put the gates up. We didn't have gates. We didn't have the flagger. We just drove and honked the horn and just get out of the way. We're coming in. It's a working warehouse, people. And so it's a lot different today than when I started. Now we look at safety and try not to hurt people. You might get that where a place you've lived. You'll say, well, what is it like to live in Germany? And again, that was 40 years ago. So I can tell you what it was like then, but I don't know now. It could have changed a lot. One of the things I do remember living there is when you were in the cities weren't joined together like here. Like we're in Mesa, Tempe, Chandler. We're all connected, really. It's like one big city. There it wasn't. So as you were leaving town and you're driving, the speed limit sign had gray lines through it. That meant end of speed limit. And you just go however fast you want. And for me, normal was about 80. And so that was normal streets. And you hear people talk about the Autobahn. Well, again, they didn't have speed limits on the Autobahn. But you'd be driving. I remember we rented a Mercedes. We were going to Switzerland. And Libby's parents had come over to Germany, and we were all together. And I'm cruising down the Autobahn at 225 kilometers an hour, which is about 138. And her dad was bare. I mean, his knuckles were white holding on. But what you do is you watch the rearview mirror because somebody way back there will flash their headlights. And so you make sure you're in the slow lane, and they would just go whoo, right on by you. And so some of these things, if you've never been there, that's the question, is like, what is it like? What is it like, the food or the place you work, where you live? We're always asking them, what is it like? Because if we've never been there, we don't know. And Jesus, we've been going all through Matthew, and he gives us several places where, what is the kingdom like? And when he describes what's the kingdom like, it's interesting because we've never been there. It's hard for us to describe it. We see some descriptions in the scriptures that are like pearly gates and streets of gold. We hear those kind of things, but when Jesus is explaining what the kingdom is like, it's interesting because he's more like what you need to do to get there or how to get there. It's never really a description like if you were to describe Salt River, you'd say, well, we have purple chairs, we have blue chairs. He's not really describing it. He's telling us what we need to do to get there, what we need how to get there. And so there's several places. We've been going through Matthew. I'm going to read off a few of these. He says, for the kingdom of heaven is like a certain king who arranged a marriage for his son. And so you're trying in your head, you got to try to, how does that tell us about heaven? But you go back and you read it. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed that a man took and sowed in his field. And he describes from the tiniest little thing to the biggest tree. he'll say, for the kingdom is like a landowner who went out early in the morning and hired laborers. And some of us remember that story. It wasn't that long ago. We just talked about that. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant seeking beautiful pearls. And he was willing to sell everything and buy the best pearl. The kingdom of heaven is like a certain king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. This morning we were talking about us in the kingdom as the servants. And he tells us what the kingdom of heaven is like, talking about settling accounts. The kingdom of heaven was like a treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and he hid it and then sold everything to buy that field. It was that important to him. It was that exciting. And again, the kingdom of heaven is like a dragnet. It was cast out into the sea and it collects some of everything. And the kingdom of heaven is like leaven, where it spreads in all the meal. And so the whole loaf is leavened. The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. Now, if you go back and you read the story, somebody sowed tares in his field also. So Jesus has given us all these examples, and I encourage you, we've read most of those already, but go back and read those stories and get this idea of how do you get to heaven, or what do you have to do, how you learn his ways. Is what he's really telling us. He's not doing it like a description of food or a description of a place you work. It's more of a description on how you get there or what you need to do. And so I encourage you, that was 9 of them that he did, and there's more. But go back and read them and study them, and each one of these through Matthew, Jesus is showing you how. He's showing you how to enter the kingdom, how to have forgiveness, how to have compassion. That one I need all the time. I have to read that a lot. How to invite everyone. Jesus is going to show us how he will separate the good and the bad. And all these examples that he gives, he says, what is the kingdom of heaven like? And so we're kind of used to that statement in other topics, but Jesus keeps bringing it up all through Matthew, this concept of what is it like? And so we're going to go to Matthew 25 and verse 14, as he read this morning, or just a little bit ago. It's another one of those, for the kingdom of heaven is like. And so this one we'll spend a little time, we'll dig into it a little bit. And so Matthew 25, verse 14, it says, for the kingdom of heaven is like a man traveling to a far country, who called on his own servants and delivered his goods to them. And to one he gave 5 talents, and to another 2, and to another 1. And it was each according to their ability. And immediately he went off on his journey. So it's interesting because it says that he's getting ready to go. He delivered his goods to them. So the things that he had of value, he gave to these people, but he did it according to their ability. So sometimes we have to stop and think, because later it's going to talk about, he says 5 talents. He delivered his goods and he talks about talents. And the thing that we want to recognize too is the goods or the talents that you have, they're from God. They're from God. It wasn't something that you developed. You thought, well, I'm going to be good at this. These goods or these talents were given by God. And according to your ability. So we sometimes think, well, I don't know what's my abilities, and we'll try to think up something that we can do. And sometimes we'll get caught up. If I'm just a 1 talent person, and I'm looking at the person with 5 talents thinking, man, I wish I could do all of that. Oh, I wish I could do at least the 2 talent guy. And I have a funny story. But my dad tells this story, and it's a true story. And it talks about that concept of looking at somebody else's talents. And he was unchurched. So this is a worldly story, but it's interesting because he grew up with 5, there was 5 children, and then the 2 parents, my grandparents, and he was the oldest. And I know this is weird today, but they actually sat down to dinner together. They sat around the table. That's not something that we've done in our household in a long time, unless the company comes over. But so they would sit down for dinner, and sometimes there was dessert. And my dad tells the story about the cake. So Grandma would get up from dinner, or his mom, and cut the cake, and of course Grandpa gets the first piece, and then she would give it out to the oldest first. So my dad was the oldest. He'd get his cake, and it would go around the table. And he says that the younger ones, that took them a while to catch on, but they all knew, don't look at the other person's cake. You would get your cake, and if you were like trying to see if they got more than you, Grandma would just come by and take your plate. You were done. And I was thinking, wow, I could really like that concept, but we didn't do that. We were dessert eaters in my house, lots of junk food. So, but that was the concept. Don't look at somebody else's cake, because you'll get yours taken away. And I just thought that was a good idea. And they weren't trying to teach a Bible lesson or whatever, because they didn't really care. But that concept that we'll get caught up with, well, this is my talent, and it's not that great, but their talent is amazing. Well, you were put here by God. The abilities were given to you by God. So your talent is great. It's amazing in its own way. But don't you get caught up just looking like, well, I wish I had that talent. So, but I'm going to bring in 2 Corinthians 10:12. I know some of you have got electronic Bibles, so you'll be right there, but I'm just going to read it. 2 Corinthians 10:12, it says, "For we dare not class ourselves or compare ourselves with those who commend themselves. But they, measuring themselves by themselves and comparing themselves among themselves, are not wise." And so that's where we could get caught up thinking about our talent and looking at their talent. One of the things that I don't lead singing, and you don't want me to, and it's not any good, but I can look and see others leading singing, and it's amazing, and they lead us all, and we do good together. Even when we're a small group, you can still do it. But he says it's not wise. Don't compare yourself with what they're doing. We all have different talents, we all have different abilities, and they're God-given, and they're according to our ability. So we just do ours. Do ours. And if you have more than somebody else, do them all. Do our abilities. It's not wise to look and compare with each other. We're going to go on Matthew 25, verse 16. So the guy's gone. He gave his goods, his talents to the people according to their ability, and he left town. Then he who had received the 5 talents went and traded with them, and made another 5 talents. And likewise, he who had received 2 gained 2 more also. But he who had received 1 went and dug in the ground and hid his Lord's money. And I just want to start with that right there. He mentioned it's the Lord's money, or the talent, as they're called earlier, their talents or the goods. It's not even yours. And he went and hid that. It's not his, and what we're going to find out, he's afraid of what to do with it. And so he just hides it. In Hebrews, it talks about, and it was interesting because it came up in class this morning if you were here. Hebrews 10:24, "And let us consider one another in order to stir up love and good works." So sometimes I wonder if we're looking at that person with the 1 talent that's even afraid to use it. And we're like, is that all they do? And that's not the right way to look at it. Is that they always do the same thing. They never do anything else. If they're using their talent, great. But sometimes somebody with the 2 talents or the 5 talents should be considering them and stirring them up for good works. Stirring them up for good works. That's when we come together, because out there, they're not encouraging us at all. But we come together and we encourage one another. And it's something that when, say I'm the 1 talent guy, if I want more, I need to do something with the talent I have. If I'm not using it, why would God even want me to have another talent? Even to try to juggle more than one thing to do. Sometimes that talent is what you might think is just menial, whatever, but somebody had to get here this morning and turn on the AC. right? Because of where we live. And somebody came and got communion ready. So sometimes our talent doesn't seem like a great big thing, but it helped us all. It took care of everybody. So if you want more talent, you have to do something with the talent you have. Go ahead and do something with it. And those of us don't look down at the person with one talent like, well, is that all they do? No, they're doing something great. And so we should be encouraging one another, like Hebrews said, consider them and stir up love and good works. Stir us up. Let's work together. Let's all do our part. I think sometimes we don't recognize our own talent, and others might be just looking at you thinking, man, you're amazing at this. Oh, no, I'm not. Yes, you are. No, not me. And what happens usually is because we're afraid. I remember there was no way you were going to get me in front of the group. That just wasn't going to happen. And now I don't have the talent for it, but they tricked me into it, and I came up. And I love coming up and teaching a class, even when I might not be that good at it. But I was tricked into it by some good friends, and I'm so thankful. I'm so thankful. But so you might have a talent that you just think you're no good at, or you just won't do it in front of somebody else. You need to share that talent. You need to use your talent. Matthew 25:19. And after a long time, the Lord of those servants came and settled accounts with them. I just wanted to comment, the Lord is coming. The Lord is coming back, and he's going to settle accounts. But in this case, he gave his goods to them. They were supposed to do something with those talents. They left, and now he's back, and he's going to settle accounts. Verse 20, it says, So he who had received 5 talents came and brought 5 other talents, saying, Lord, you delivered to me 5 talents. Look, I have gained 5 more talents besides them. And his Lord said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. I highlighted a few of those things, and I wanted to go back to them, and then I'm going to go straight into verse 22 because they say the same thing. It's amazing. It says, the Lord delivered, I have gained, and he says, well done, good and faithful servant. Enter into the joy of your Lord. Verse 22, and he also, who had received 2 talents, came and said, Lord, you delivered to me 2 talents. Look, I have gained 2 more talents besides them. And his Lord said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into my joy, the joy of your Lord. You see that both of those 2 people did something with their talents, and the Lord had the same thing to say. And it almost, he says, the Lord gives, you work with it. And then verse 21 and 23 both say that he was faithful. He was faithful, and enter into the joy of the Lord. It's like there's an equation there. There's an equation. The Lord gives, you work with faith, and then you enter into his joy. And so sometimes we just want to go and hide our talent. And the Lord says, good and faithful servant. Both of those people did something with their talent. And it's interesting because he says it twice. It doesn't matter how much talent you got. You did something with it, and you were the faithful servant. Matthew 25:24. Then he who had received the 1 talent came and said, Lord, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. And I was afraid and went and hid your talent in the ground. Look, there you have what is yours. He went and hid it in the ground. He dug a hole and hid it. And he says it's his. He knows it's his. And it's kind of interesting because what you see is his fear. He let his fear get in the way of his talent. The Lord gave him a talent according to his ability, and fear stepped in. And fear will do this. It'll stop you, and it'll cause you to think, what if? What if? What if I'm not any good? What if I fail? What if they don't like it? That's where fear will come in, and it'll step right in and just stop you. And now you're just analyzing and you're trying to decide, well, and somehow Satan will always give you the negative side. And say, what if they liked it? We don't think that. We think, what if they don't like what I'm doing? What if I'm not any good at it? What if I fail? Satan will always put in those thoughts. But that's because we let that fear come in. And in reality, what he told his Lord who gave him the talent, I was afraid of the outcome. Not that he did the thing and find out what the outcome is. He was afraid of the outcome. And so he hid the talent, dug a hole and put it in there. And sure enough, when the guy comes back, he has it. Here's the talent you gave me. And his response tells us a little bit. Verse 26, Matthew 25, verse 26. But his Lord answered and said to him, you wicked and lazy servant, you knew that I reap where I have not sown, and you gather where I have not scattered seed. So you ought to have deposited my money with the bankers, and at my coming I would have received back my own with interest. Now, that's an interesting concept because now I haven't looked in lately, but you put your money in a savings account and you were getting like 0.03% or something. It's not even much. And this guy, this guy that handed out the talents, he would have been happy with that. You gave me mine back and this little tiny interest. He would have been happy with that. So you just have to stop and think, man, when I can take my talent and actually do something with it, it doesn't take much to make it pleasing to the one that gave it. So I don't know what interest is now, but I don't imagine you get much in your savings account because none of us save. So if we did, it's still not much. And that's all we needed, to just do a little bit. Take that talent and do something. And he certainly calls him a wicked and lazy servant. I don't see how if you just hide your talent, you're not using it, how you could not be looked at as being lazy. The talent is according to your ability. You got to keep that in mind. He had one talent according to his ability, but he hid it. It wasn't outside of his ability. It wasn't something that he couldn't do, even if it scared him to death to do it. He could still do it. He had the ability. And he had the one talent in his ability, and he hid it. And there's two different outcomes to this, because you see the guy with 5 talents and the guy with 2 talents, they both did something and came back, and the outcome for them was, well done, good and faithful servant. Enter into the joy of your Lord. That's what I want to hear. Well done. And when the Lord comes and he looks down on me, I want him to say, well done. But sometimes we're not thinking that far ahead. We just have our little talent and we're scared to death and we don't want to do it in front of somebody and we don't know what to do. And we're not even given interest. We're just set it aside. But the other outcome, he says, wicked and lazy servant. Cast the unprofitable servant into outer darkness. That's the part that, to me, it's worth working on your talent. Work on that a little bit. He says, verse 25, 28, it says, so take the talent from him and give it to him who had 10 talents. For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he who has abundance. But from him who does not have, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the unprofitable servant into the outer darkness. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. The concept of not doing, it's a little bit harsh ending for that guy. 2 different outcomes. The people that went out and used their talent and the people that didn't. And again, it's the talent that's according to their ability. I know when we look in the mirror, we just never think that we're good enough to do it. And that's why the scriptures talk about us coming together and encouraging one another, because there's a talent to be done, And we'll see it. Oh yeah, you could do that easy. And no, not me. I can't do it. And our talents are all different. It could be what we think is the smallest thing, but it helps everybody. And we'll get caught up in not doing, even though it was in our ability. 1 Timothy 1:12. This is Paul speaking, and he says, "And I thank Christ Jesus our Lord, who has enabled me because he counted me faithful, putting me into the ministry." And the concept here, I was just picturing Paul. He's thankful because the Lord gave the talent. He says he enabled me. He's able to do it. The Lord gave him the talent. And then he did it and was counted faithful. And he put him in the ministry. So he could do the talent. He had more to do. And Paul, as we know, he was going congregation to congregation everywhere, trying to encourage people and to teach. And he's giving the Lord thanks for being able. So he doesn't take the ability, oh, it was my ability and I came up with it. God gave the ability, and he's thanking them. I just want to finish up with Philippians 4:13. I think this one covers a lot of things. Philippians 4:13 says, "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." Sometimes we're looking at the talent, or we think the lack of a talent, and all we have to do is practice a little bit. And we feel like we don't have the strength. Well, maybe you don't, but Christ strengthens me. If I recognize a talent, or I'm willing to try something, maybe you'll find out you really are no good at it, but you might be good enough to get it done. And if we stop and think that Christ is the one that strengthens us, sometimes we're only looking at our own strength, what we think our ability isn't what God's looking down, saying, "I gave you the ability. I gave it to you. Just go do it." And we'll get caught up looking in the mirror and saying, "Well, I don't know. I can't do that." So that's we want to finish up with that concept. I'm going to read Philippians 4:13 one more time. "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." All things. Not just some things. All things that he gives us the ability, we can do it in his strength. He's going to strengthen us to do it. So maybe you haven't been faithful. Maybe you put that talent in the ground. You just buried it. Like, nobody will notice that I'm not doing that. But so, like I said, something simple. Somebody turned the AC on. Somebody opened the doors. Somebody got communion ready. They're all in our ability, those things, and it helps everyone. And so sometimes we don't think we can do it, but Christ gives us the strength to do it, whatever it is. And if maybe you just need to stop and think about that talent that you've buried and dig that up. Maybe you need encouragement from us. If you're struggling in your faith, maybe you just have never used that talent. Maybe you don't know what it is. It's been buried for so long you forgot. But if we can help you in any way, dig that talent up, help you in your faith, maybe some more study, whatever it is, you can do that. You can come up and let us know as we stand and sing.